think there's a good time to start. And those that are just coming in, so welcome to all of you. I'm not going to have an opportunity here to welcome you individually. I just wanted to review very briefly what we've done in the last 2 weeks. We started just by reading the opening text of the Torah, the first 5 psukim. The first week we made lots and lots of observations. We had very few explanations, but we noticed that it's a lot more complex than we ever thought. And then last week tried giving it a little bit of a shape, that perhaps there were different phases of creation. There was the phase of creating the raw materials, followed by doing something with those raw materials. That's one way of looking at it. There was a second way of looking at it, and that was to look at the phrase "Vayar Elokim ki tov," and that, however you decide to translate ki tov, what it means in the context here is that there was a phase of creation that was completed. It's done, and that's why when Hashem is busy separating out the waters, right? Or as I like to say, separating out the different phases of matter. On that second yom, right, it's not completed yet. And that's why there's no kitov. The division into 3 different types of matter isn't complete. And that's why there's no kitov. But on the next yom, on the third yom, when he does finish that, there's a kitov. And then when he finishes the next significant piece of creation, there's another kitov. So kitov is one way of measuring what a complete stage of creation is. How to define that, I really have no idea, but it does seem like that's what's happening over here. The other thing that's happening is there's a whole separate organization that mostly overlaps with the kitov organization, but not completely, and that's the Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Voker. Right? Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Voker means we went from a stage of confusion to a stage of clarity. That transition, right? That transition marks it as a yom, as a stage of creation. And right now, the word yom, I'm trying to be careful about not using the word day, because it's not a day. There can't be days yet. And Erev and Boker can't mean evening and morning, because we don't have the things that are necessary to make evenings and mornings. So I'm trying. So I know that it can be difficult using these words, and I think the Torah itself has difficulty using these words. As we pointed out, there are words that are used and then later on defined, which means that they have multiple meanings. There's what they mean before they're defined and what they mean after they're defined. And all that adds to some of the confusion, but also helps us to begin to get a sense as to what to begin to look for. So there are phases of creation, okay? And there are 2 ways of marking those phases of creation. One of them is the kitov, and the other is in the Vayi Erev and Vayi Voker. I just wanted to point out as you know, as a comment, as from where I'm sitting, I so much appreciate the when we first started this, I said I wanted to create some kind of a Beit Midrash atmosphere, and obviously with people distributed all over the world, and seeing each other only virtually, having a Beit Midrash atmosphere is a little bit more difficult, and doing that with 20, 30, 40 people in a room is even more challenging. So we've been playing with this a little bit the first week. Let everybody speak whenever they wanted to, and that got a little bit out of hand for some people, and we needed to control that a little bit more. Last week we had time set aside for people to feel free to comment, and the comments on the Google Doc have been amazing. And those of you who are doing the preparation in between the shiurim, and I see your comments, and I read through every single one of them, sometimes more than one time. to get to really understand what it is that you're saying over here. It's a wonderful tool, and I encourage you all to go in to add your comments in between the shiurim, to comment on what other people have written, right? Or to at least read what other people have written, and that way our conversations are going to be a little bit different. There are some fascinating comments that were made on this next text that we're going to do today, and in some of them, I looked through them and my jaw dropped open as I learned new things, which I always do for my students, and for me, it's wonderful. Just seeing some of the connections and some of the observations that I've never seen before, and I am so deeply appreciative for that. And I think everybody here can gain from that also by joining the conversation, by reading what other people have said. If you just want to be a passive participant, by commenting not only your own comments, but by commenting on what somebody else wrote. I think that's it's a wonderful tool. It's simple, and it's available to us. Okay, so today our goal was to was to begin to explore the fourth yom of creation, and maybe even we'll see if we go into the fifth. But before we do that, I just wanted to point something out. Every week the office at Torah in Motion asks me for a title for this year. And this week, the title that I gave for this year, and I don't know that you ever get to see it. It might be that the only one that it's significant for is the person writing it in the office. But actually, for me, it's helpful because it helps me to focus a little bit more, not just saying, okay, well, let's pick up where we left off last week. But the title I gave for the shiur today was The Cycles of Creation. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to take a little bit of time, right now, just a few minutes, just to take a look at one of the cycles of creation, and then maybe later on we'll take a look at another one. Okay, and they're two very different kinds of cycles. And to do that, I'm going to start just by sharing my screen for a few moments. Here we go. So what we have here on your screen, and I hope you can all see that. I can try to make it a little bit bigger. There we go. So it's easier for you to see. Okay. What we have here is the framework that really is this is sort of the template for every one of the six days of creation. Okay, there's slight variations from one day to the next, but for the most part, the template is the day, or the yom, starts with Vayomer Elohim Yehi. Right? God says, let it be. And then Vayehi. Okay? On the first yom is Yehi Or, Vayehi Or. Let there be whatever Or is. And we're going to spend a little bit more time looking at that today. Or on the other days is Vayehi Chen. And so it was. Okay? God says, Elohim says, let it, right? And it was. Okay? And then on some of the days, on some of the yamim, we have a creation verb. Vayivra Elokim, Vayas, Vayavdel, right? So God made, God separated, God created, and usually one of those three. There's sometimes there's one more, but there's some verb of creation. Not all the days have that, and this is one of those puzzles that I haven't quite figured out yet. Why is it that on some days there's aside from the Vayomer Elokim Yehi Vayehi, there's a separate act of creation that's described, and on some days there isn't. My best guess, by the way, is, and this came out of a discussion I had with my daughter last week, my best guess is that on the days where God creates using the word bara. And this was an observation I made. Any day where it says bara, there is not a separate act of creation. Okay, so let's just keep that in mind. That might be significant. I don't, hard to know, but vayihi or, it doesn't say vayas vayiv, right? That was a day Breisheet bara Elokim. So on that yom, there is no separate verb of creation. On the fifth yom, which we haven't seen yet, Vayomer Elokim Yishritzu Hamayim, right? And then it says Vayivra Elokim et Ataninim Agadolim. So when there's bara, you don't have any of the other verbs of creation, and you have that again in the on the sixth yom. Okay, but on some of the yomim, some of the days, we have a creation verb, and others we don't. Then usually, and we already looked at the exception to this, but usually Vayar Elokim Kitov. There's a reflection, and that's on some days, right? There's a renaming. Vayikra Elokim Laor Yom, or Vayikra Elokim Larakia Shamayim. So some days there's a naming. I think there are 5 things that are named in this first chapter, and then each yom concludes with the Vayhi Erev Vayhi Voker. And there's a template. It's great. And this template is works for all 6 days of creation, with minor variations. It was based on this, for example, that even I think on the first shiur that somebody raised the possibility that the first 2 psukim are an introduction, because it's only in the 3rd pasuk, it's only in pasuk 3 that we have Vayomer Elokim. So based on that, somebody wanted to suggest that the opening 2 psukim are just an introduction. Okay, but this is one of the cycles of creation, and it's pretty significant. And we're going to come back in another couple of weeks to take a look at this again to see where there is a major divergence from this template. Okay, but this is the cycle of a yom. The yom starts with Vayomer Elokim Yehi Vayihi. That by itself, I think, is cause, even that the opening 2 lines of this template, I think, give us cause for reflection. God says it should be, and it is. We say this in our tefillah every single day. Baruch she'amar, blessed is he who spoke, v'haya ha'olam, and the world just came to being. She'amar vayomer Elokim, and it happened. Okay, you have it in Tehillim. Hu amar vayehi, he said it, and it happened. Okay, and it's interesting that both the pasuk in Tehillim and the Tefillah are clearly built on Breisheet Perek Aleph, the verb amar, to speak, and vayehi, Rosh Amar v'haya, Hu amar vayehi. Okay, God speaks through creation, or God, I should say differently, God creates through speaking. Okay, there's something in there that I think is worthwhile reflecting on. Again, when we come to the 6th yom, we're going to come back to this and discuss this a little bit more. But we see it here on the screen, and it is so clear that the Torah is emphasizing that. The other piece of this that I think the Torah might be emphasizing, that Vayomer Elokim Yehi, and it's so powerful in the first time, like in Pasuk Gimel, right? Vayomer Elokim Yehi or Vayi or. He said there should be or, and it was. Right? The word Elokim, and somebody in that first week commented that on the name Elokim. doesn't use the name of Yud K Vav K, the four-letter tetragrammaton, but it does use Elokim. Elokim means the Almighty, the All-Powerful. There is one of the sublayers that comes across very powerfully in this text, and you don't get it always. Sometimes you get it by a slow, close reading, and sometimes you get it by taking in the entire thing as a whole. When you hear this pattern repeating, the sense that we get is that God is the only sole creator. He's the Almighty, and he doesn't need to do anything more than to will it into existence. God's willing it into existence is that Vayomer Elokim. And the reason that that's so significant is if you've ever read any of the creation myths of other cultures, it's especially true if you take a look at the cultures of the Middle East and Near East, but it's true. Japanese have ancient creation cultures. The Romans have creation cultures. The American Indians have creation cultures, and creation myths and stories. There are profound differences between all of those stories and the story we have told here in Perek Aleph. In all of those stories, there are multiple gods, and creation is usually, or almost always, the product of something that went wrong. There was a fight between the gods, and as a result of that fight, the world came into existence. There was a fight between the gods. One of the gods defeated the other god, chopped him up, so his blood became the oceans, and his bones became the land. Right? In American Indian culture, you have the animals. You have the animals were the gods, and we have things that happen between the animals, and they're the ones that created the world because they were fighting with each other, and all the stories about what the stars were. The ancient Indians believed that the stars were actually holes in the rakia that let the light through, and those holes were made by I think by a bear who poked his claws through. There was a fight. There was a fight between the gods. That's what most of the ancient cultures. That's how they understood how the world came to being, and what the Torah does, to an extent, this opening perek is a very powerful polemic against that. First of all, there aren't gods. There's one. There's one God, and he has all the powers. Number two, he doesn't argue with anybody. What he wants happens. Vayomer Elokim Yehi, Vayehi. It happens. That's all it is. And when he creates it until it's complete. Kitov. So this cycle, this repetition, this template is not only to generate that familiarity, but it builds a very powerful sense of the story that's being told here is a story that is a polemic against all the polytheistic cultures. There is one God. He wills the world into creation. He does it intentionally. He does it on purpose. Okay, and that is that's the cycle, and that's the Vayomer Elokim. Okay, I'm going to take a pause here. We'll take some questions and comments. I'm going to shut down my sharing, and there's a good time to pause. And no pressure. If nobody has comments or questions, Wendy, you raised your hand. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm just curious, there must be a reason that the verb that's used or the word that's used for God to assert his almighty power is vayomer. It could have been he wanted, he thought, but he spoke. So I'm assuming we're supposed to learn something from that.
That sounds like a good observation. And for right now, I'm going to let you suggest yourself what that something should be.
What, me
I,
or all of us, you said?
I mean, everybody individually, that we don't have to all walk away with the same idea. At some point, I might suggest something, but for right now, um, you know, I think that's a great observation as to why Vayomer is used.
I'm just, if the whole purpose of the story is for us to learn about how to live a meaningful, law-abiding, fulfilling life, that's what humans do. We speak.
Okay, that sounds great. And I'm sure that there are lots of other people who are going to have really, really interesting things to say about, but thank you for sharing that. That was a great observation. Okay, Rona, I see your hand up. Rona, your microphone is off, so nobody can hear you yet.
Sorry. I say I had the same question as you did, Wendy. One thought that I have about that is that speaking involves the use of breath, and breath is critical in creation. Breisheet starts with, in a sense, God's breath over the water. It's integral to the human creation. And so I think there might be an interesting connection there with breath. I'm still left with the question that I had, I think it was the first or second day, which is when we as humans say, let there be X or Y, we are often talking to the divine. And here God is speaking. Who is, if at all, is he speaking to? Okay, is he alone in this void? Or is there some other force that he is speaking to? It's a strange use of the word, in a way, for me. Let there be. So, two thoughts there.
Okay. Debbie and then Chaim.
So it might be a small point, but Biyom Hashishi, we do still have Vayomer Elokim, but we do have a Naaseh Adam B'Tzalmenu Kidmutenu. So there is, quote unquote, some consultation going on Biyom Hashishi. Still Vayomer and still Vayivra, but somebody else is involved.
Okay, we're going to have to hold off for right now on Yom HaShishi. We still have a ways to go till we get there, but thank you for pointing that out. And Chaim?
Could you consider the words Vayar and Vayikra also as creation verbs? Their variations on bara. I mean, they're close in terms of their letters, but could you consider those also creation? Vayar as a creation word and Vayikra as a creation word.
So I'll ask you the question. Can you consider them creation words?
Yes.
Okay.
In other words, the Almighty sees something and it is. The Almighty calls and it becomes.
Okay. Well, one of the things, by the way, that I'm a firm believer in is it doesn't make a difference if I can see it that way. If you can see it that way, that's great. Okay. And there's, the point of this is a shiur, but it's a Beit Midrash. And a Beit Midrash, everybody brings themselves and their own insights. So I bring mine, but you bring yours, and everybody can walk away. We might have some shared knowledge, and we will also have knowledge that we each take for ourselves that might be different from the next one. Okay. What I'd like to do is I'd like to now move forward. We began with sort of a reflection on the first three yamim of creation, and I'd like to move forward. Those of you who commented on the Google Doc made some really extraordinary observations, and I'd like to start just by going through one or two of those observations. All right. Verse 14, Pasuk 14, Yudalid, Vayomer Elokim, this is the fourth Yom of creation, Yihi me'orot birkia hashamayim, So let there be me'orot. And somebody pointed out, and I don't remember who it was, that me'orot is clearly linked back to or of the first day, of the first yom. Yehi me'orot. So these are the sources of that or. Okay, so whatever or is, these things are connected back to that first yom. Let there be me'orot birakia hashamayim, and rakia hashamayim. I don't know if that's the same thing as rakia of the second yom. I don't know if it's something else, because that rakia was called shamayim, but it was never called rakia hashamayim. So I don't know what rakia hashamayim is, and I haven't known what. I never figured out what rakia hashamayim is. So I'm just pointing it out. Lahavdil. And now we're told what the function of these ma'orot is. Now, I just want to. I'm going to freeze this right here. Right, we have or that's connected. Right, the sources of, or the things that make the or, right, connected back to the or of the first yom. All the translations that you pick up, every single one of them will translate or as light. Certainly in modern Hebrew it means that. Certainly in the rest of Tanakh it means that. And therefore, these ma'orot are sources of light. Or as the translations would often offer, they are luminaries. They are light sources. If that's the case, what would you expect the function of these me'orot to be? Primary function of the me'orot would be
Make light.
to make light. Let's finish Pasuk 14. Vayomer Elokim yehi ma'orot birki hashamayim, lahavdil bein hayom uvein halayla, to distinguish between times. Not only that, v'hayula otot, they should be for signs. I don't know what kind of signs those are. Ulamo adim, and for set times. A moed is a time to meet. Comes from the word va'ad, which means to meet. A moed is a meeting time, right? Moed can also be like ohel moed is the meeting place, right? But moadim are meeting times. So this is time. Uliamim, and for days. Vishanim, and years. What's the primary function of the ma'orot? Timekeepers.
And separation.
Right?
And separation.
Right? Meaning they distinguish between the daytime, the nighttime. They distinguish from one day to the next day. They distinguish between 1 year and the next year. These are timekeepers. If you remember, when we learned the first yom, I was very careful about this, and I noticed that back in Pasuk 5, Pasuk Hey, Vayikra Elokim la'or, or was then called Yom, right? Meaning whatever he created that was called or was a function of time. And V'lachoshech he called Laila. So or and Choshech, at least in this opening passage of the Torah, maybe not in the rest of the Torah, but in this opening passage of the Torah, it seems like or and Choshech refer to time. And here, when we get to the fourth Yom, we have the Ma'orot, the sources, or the objects that are created in order to do this or stuff, right? Their primary function is time. That's how they're introduced in Pasuk 14, Pasuk Yudalid. Vayomer Elokim yehi ma'orot birki hashamayim. For what purpose? Lahavdil ben yom uvein layla, right? To separate between day and night. V'hayula otot. I don't know what kinds of signs these are. Ulamo adim, but for times. Uliamim for times. Vishanim for times. Ma'orot are timekeepers. So or in Breisheet, or at least in Breisheet Perek Aleph, or is time. Ma'orot are timekeepers and not luminaries. Their primary function is to keep time. Vahayu lima orot Now we get to the next pasuk, pasuk 15, pasuk Tedvav. V'hayu lema'orot birkiah hashamayim laha'ir al haaretz. Secondarily, they also function to light up the earth. Okay, so ma'orot, we have ma'orot, we have them as timekeepers. That's the primary function, which brings us back really to the opening of creation. That the opening of creation is in order for a mortal existence, in order for I'm forgetting the word, but for a corporeal existence to exist, God has to create time. For God, there is no time. And the creation of the first Yom is the creation of time itself. And it's only later on that the timekeepers take on a secondary function, and that is as sources of light. And that then takes us through the rest of this fourth Yom. Vayas Elokim et shnei ha'ma'orot hagdolim. God made the two great luminaries, one of them greater than the other. So one of them, within the great ones, one of them is the greater one, Hama'or Hagadol, and one of them is the lesser one of the great ones, the Ma'or HaKatan, the smaller one, right? And they are Lememshelet Hayom and Lememshelet Halayla. And that's a funny word, and somebody also, again, pointed that out in the document, this Memshelet, the governance that they rule over. And to some extent, maybe if you use a slightly different variation on that, not to rule over, but they dominate. The sun dominates our day. It defines the day, it dominates the day. The moon dominates the night. And for us city dwellers, we don't necessarily appreciate it. But for people who live out of the cities, they know that there's a huge difference between walking outside after dark on a moonlit night and on a night that's a new moon, and it's just a sliver, if anything at all. Huge difference. The moon can make shadows. You're not going to get a moonburn, but the moon can make shadows. So it is one of the great me'orot. It defines our time, right? It defines our time even in ways that the Torah doesn't describe here, because the moon defines the month, right? That's where the word month comes from. It's the month, right? So the moon defines our relationship to time in that cycle. The sun defines our relationship to time, both for a day and for an annual cycle and for the yearly cycle. And the Kochavim, the stars, and what the stars accomplish. So maybe, and here I'm just going to throw out a guess, maybe the stars accomplish something completely different. They are not so much timekeepers, and they are not so much light givers, but they do help us navigate. And maybe that's the otot. Maybe. I don't know. Okay, so God put them in Shamayim, He put them up in Rikiah Shamayim, Laha'ir al Haaretz, V'limshol. I'm in Pasuk 17 and 18 now, Pasuk Yud Zayin and Yud Chet. Laha'ir al Haaretz, to light up the Aretz and to dominate. V'limshol bayom u'valayla, u'lahavdil bin ha'or v'in ha'choshech, and to be this things that distinguish between daytime and nighttime. Vayar Elokim Kitov. And that was now completed. Okay. I see there are a bunch of hands. I'd like to take your comments, but I want to do something else first before we go, but before we pause to take comments. So I pointed out, and some of you pointed out on in your own comments on the document, that what we have here is, oh yes, this is an echo of the first Yom. Right? So it turns out that the fourth Yom actually does parallel the first Yom. You have Or and Choshech, and you have the Ma'orot, which define the times of Or and Choshech. If we stop to take a look at a broader picture, it turns out that not only is the first Yom paralleled by the fourth Yom, but, and I'll show this to you, I'm going to share my screen again. Here you have a map of all 6 quote-unquote days, all 6 Yamim of creation, okay? On the left-hand side, you have the first 3 days, and again, I put days in quotation marks. On the second column, you have the second 3 days. And if you take a look, so day 1 features Or, day 4 features Me'orot. Okay, they're parallel. Day 2 has the separation of the upper waters from the lower waters. And on its parallel, day 5, the sea animals are created to inhabit the lower waters, and the flying creatures are created to inhabit the upper waters. So day 5 clearly parallels day 2. And then day 6 parallels day 3. Okay? On day 3 is a double creation. Right? The first is the emergence of land, and the second is the emergence of vegetation. And day 6 is marked by land animals who live on the land, and they are explicitly identified as consumers of vegetation. Okay? It turns out then, when you take a look at this, the 6 days of creation, I remember as a kid being very confused. How do I remember what was created when? It turns out it's really easy. It's really a cycle of 3. You have Or, the separation of the upper from the lower, and land and vegetation. And then you have that same cycle repeated. You have the Me'orot, followed by the things which inhabit the upper and the lower waters, followed by the land animals and the vegetation consumers. What does this mean? So it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I'm going to say one thing now, and then reserve the rest for a later time. But I want to say one thing now that's going to bring us back to a comment I made toward the first part of the shiur. And that is that we spoke about the creation story, Perek Aleph, as marking God as the only power in the universe. He is Elohim, the Almighty, the All-Powerful. His will brings about existence. And that was one aspect of God. Here we see a completely different aspect. Here we see God as a designer. I often ask myself the question, why is all this necessary? Couldn't God have simply said, let there be a world that is complete? Poof. Was God not capable? Did he really need 6 days or 6 eons or 6 phases in which to do this? Or perhaps it's described this way because the Torah is trying to tell us something in the process. It's trying to describe something about God. God is not just almighty and all-powerful, but God is intentional. And for now, I'm just gonna leave that, meaning the world was designed, it was planned in advance. There was nothing accidental. God's creative, he's intentional, and he designs what's there. Okay, I'm going to pause right now. I'm going to end my share, and I see there are lots of people who want to make comments. So let's open the floor to comments. I think Shalom, your hand was up first.
I want to go back to the Otot, Moadim, Yamim, and Shanim. You sort of alluded to the issue of Otot, but in the sentence, the Otot are distinct from Moadim and Yamim and Shanim. So we don't know what the Ot represents. It's always got to represent something, but it's left unknown here. And then the light is assigned to be the timekeeper. But what is it the symbol of? What are they the symbol of as Otot?
That's a wonderful question. I wish I knew the answer.
I mean, we have Ot in all kinds of other places. Ot al Yadcha, which seems to be parallel to Zichron Beinecha. But what is the there's got to be something behind an Ot, because that's the nature of the Ot. It's not at all declared here.
Okay. I'm going to wait for you to suggest something, because I've tried many times and I haven't come up with anything that satisfies me. So I'm not going to waste your time with my thoughts.
Well, the simplest answer would be it represents God's presence over the created universe. It's because it's pervasive, it's always there, and it symbolizes all the rest of what we're reading here. But that's just a stab in the dark, pardon the pun.
Okay. Okay. It's a good start. And maybe over the course of time, we'll be able to flesh that out. All right, thank you. Okay, Ruth.
All right. So, quick response to the Otot. I always associated them with the Kochavim. I know the Torah is written for the people who use it, and Otot are the stars are the astrological blah blah blah. So, so we don't give much truck to astrology now, but they did then. And so the portents, the Otot, well, those are the Kochavim, right? Right. And also, as a aside, we city dwellers don't even see this anymore, but a starry night gives a lot of light. We don't even know what the Milky Way looks like anymore, but there was a time thousands of years ago when you could see a Milky Way. And at night you could walk by starlight. So that's just a thing. But a real question I have is, God on the first day, he vayavdel ben haor uven hachoshech. And now on the fourth day, he has the ma'orot to be the mavdil. So, so was it not enough? So then what was it? What did he do on the first day? And why is that not enough? See, that's a question. What is that Havdalah on the first day if he's doing it again with these me'orot? That's just a bothersome question.
So I'm going to connect your question with a different observation that was made on the Google Doc, and that was about this memshala. What does it mean that the me'orot were there, the memshelet hayom and the memshelet halayla? So I don't know.
So
I really don't know what it means. I gave a suggestion. They dominate. But what I do think is that between the first cycle of 3 days and the second cycle of 3 days, there's a shift. And one marker of that shift is God doing this alone, or is God empowering others?
That's great. That's great. He's delegate. Yeah, and this in the second cycle, there's delegation.
So here, God was the Moshel by Yom Uvalayla. He was the one who did the Havdalah. And now God is empowering this creation to take over.
As man will do on the sixth day.
Okay, so we're setting up something that's happening happening later on. Okay, but what's amazing is that you begin to see already there's the beginning of a shift, right? As I like to say, the first 3 days of creation. I'm gonna from now that we know that the word day doesn't mean a day. Okay, so the first 3 days of creation are fairly static. The second 3 days of creation, there's dynamism that's introduced. There's change. There's cycles of Yom and Laila. There are cycles of Yamim and Shanim. There are markers to the changes of time, right? So the world is becoming more dynamic. You could even say there's motion that's introduced, right? There's no movement in the first 3 days of creation. It just is. He says, Yehi vayehi. But once we hit this fourth Yom, all of a sudden, things are beginning to change. And the earliest signs that we have is he's handing over some of that memshalah to the ma'orot. He creates the ma'orot. There's an interesting thing, by the way. It's not here, but the word shemesh. The word shemesh. Now, the word shemesh doesn't appear here, but Hebrew has the word shemesh. The word shemesh means shamash. The sun is not the God. The sun is the servant of the God. The sun is the shamash, right? There's again that polemic against all the other cultures. Okay, and that's part of what's being introduced. God created all these things, yes. And that's what's being emphasized, and he's empowering them. So if you think to have power, you're right. But if you think to have independent power, you're wrong. Sun can't do anything that it wasn't programmed to do.
So
God's the great programmer.
So I will reserve that comment for day 5.
Okay. Let's leave day 5 out of this for a minute. Erin, you had your hand up a while ago. I don't know if you're still here. Your hand is still up.
So I had the same question as Ruth exactly. So that's why I put my hand down.
Okay. Beseder. Okay, I'm looking at the clock now. My clock, and
Can we consider one thing for a moment?
Yes, go ahead.
Why Memshelet is dominate? Maybe it's that the sun and the moon become the organizing principles of the day and the night. Memshelet, it reminds us of kingship, ruling, dominance. So we know the sun is dominant, but it's the biggest thing in the room, so to speak. It's like the king, but it gives us the organizing principle, which is what a king does for a kingdom. So I think we got to be really broad-minded about what Memshelet Hayom and Memshelet Alayla are.
I'm willing to be open about that. Absolutely. Okay. We have about 10 minutes left. In the 10 minutes that we have left, what I wanted to do is just briefly introduce the 5th day, the 5th Yom, so that next week we can talk about the 6th. Okay? The 5th Yom, and there are 2 things I wanted to highlight about this 5th day. I know I didn't ask you to prepare this in advance, so we'll just take it a little bit slowly. We have literally 10 minutes. Pasuk 20, Pasuk Chaf. Vayomer Elokim. Again, like every other day, it starts with Vayomer Elokim, right? God's will. Vayomer Elokim yishretzu hamayim sheretz nefesh chaya. Let the waters swarm with swarming living things. Okay, the word sheretz is often translated as sheretz. I suspect that there's a pun in here, even though I've spoken to linguists and they've told me that I'm wrong. But I think the word sheretz is, today we use sheretz to describe creepy crawling things. The word itself is translated often as swarming things. I think sheretz is a contraction, is basically a variation on sheretz, that it moves. The most identifiable feature about the things that are created on the 5th day are that they move. And they move independently. Right? Meaning the sun, the moon, the stars, they move, but they don't move independently. They're pre-programmed. The sheretz can choose whether it goes up or down or right or left. True, it has instincts, but it decides where it thinks the food is going to be. And if we're talking about a movement towards independence that started on the fourth yom, right, or a movement towards God creating things that are going to be more dynamic, let's leave independence out of this, that are going to be more dynamic, sheretz, I think, is the word that identifies that. So with the water creatures, the thing that identifies them is the fact that they move. And what about the creatures of the sky? What are they called? Oaf, which means flying things. So we have the things that move and the things that fly, right? So what's extraordinary about Pasuk 20, Pasuk Chaf, is that we have two things that are being created. They're populating the domains that God created on the parallel day, day 2, right? And those things are identified by their dynamism. Yishritzu hamayim sheretz nefesh chaya, let the waters swarm with swarming things, meaning they're moving around. The oaf, yaofeif. It's almost as if the Torah was looking for another word, couldn't find another word. The most important thing about them is that they fly. Oaf yaofeif, ala ares al pnei rikiyah shamayim. Okay, that is the highlight of the fifth day. The fifth day takes us a step further in this in this dynamic, in this move from the static to the dynamic, and the fact that we now have things that move. I'm going to make one other very quick observation here about this fifth day. In the next pasuk 21, Chaf Aleph. Vayivra Elokim et hataninim hagedolim. And then, after we hear about these taninim hagedolim, which come to us as a surprise, ve'et kol nefesh hachaya haromeset asher shertzu amayim lemineihem, ve'et kol of kanaf leminehu vayar Elokim kitov. Then God blesses them and says, Pru uravu umilu et hamayim bayamim va'of yirav ba'aretz. Okay, so we've taken that dynamism here to a whole new step, right? Not only are you going to move, but you're also going to reproduce. Okay, so things that become self-reproducing, that's a whole new step of dynamic. So we have a shifting over here from the very static of the first 3 days to things that move, but move in pre-programmed ways on the fourth day, and things that move, and not only move, but reproduce on the fifth day. Okay, and that's a shift and from one day to the next, we see significant developments in that pattern. The final comment I'm going to make about this are these taninim hagedolim. Like, God doesn't say in Pasuk 20, in Pasuk Chaf, he doesn't say,
I'm sorry, Rabbi Grumet. There's some background noise. Someone's got a TV on or something.
okay, so if you have something on, so please just turn off your microphone. Okay, thank you very much for pointing that out. These taninim hagedolim don't seem to be part of God's plan. Yishritzu hamayim sheretz nefesh chaya, which we hear about afterwards, and of yofeif hala aretz, which we hear about afterwards. But before we get to them, we hear about these taninim hagedolim. What are they doing here? So I'm going to make one comment about the taninim hagedolim and one comment about the word vayivra. There was a great scholar in the 20th century named Umberto Cassuto. Moshe David Cassuto in Hebrew. Umberto Cassuto was a communal rabbi, but also a very great Bible scholar. his expertise was ancient Near Eastern literature. He was one of the early scholars of Ugaritic. I don't know many people who can converse in Ugaritic. Kasuto probably could have. But because he mastered Ugaritic, he was able to access a whole bunch of early documents that had recently been discovered and deciphered them. And what he suggested over here, along the lines that I've been saying, putting out there, is that part of the creation story, not all of it, but part of the creation story is a polemic against ancient cultures. So in Near Eastern literature, one of the most popular figures that came up again and again in the creation stories are the Taninim. The Taninim are the creators. They are these great big sea monsters, and they're terrifying. That's why the sea is such a scary place, because the Taninim are there. They control the seas. Kasuto suggested over here that it says Vayivra Elokim et Taninim Hagedolim. That's part of an anti-polytheistic polemic. No, these Taninim were not there all along. They are not the creators. They are not these scary sea monsters that have any kind of independence. God created them. Okay, they're not independent of God, and just like God created the sun and the moon, God created the Taninim Hagedolim. Don't think anything else about them. For those who want to learn more about the Taninim Hagedolim, you'll see them referenced in Breisheet Nafshi. Breisheet Nafshi also talks about the Taninim. Okay, and there are other places in Tehillim where talking, and in Eov where they talk about the Taninim Hagedolim as these great, big, scary, powerful creatures. No, God created them. Vayivra Elokim et Taninim Hagedolim. Okay, they were not creators; they are created. Okay, that's one comment from Kasuto. The other comment I just want to make, and with this I'm going to close, and that is the word Vayivra. I suggested way back 2 weeks ago that the word bara, that verb, is reserved for 3 acts of creation. It appears on the first day, Breisheet bara Elokim et hashamayim v'et haaretz, which I interpreted as God created the raw material for everything. Yesh me'ayin. Yesh me'ayin does not, ex nihilo does not happen. Scientists are always trying to figure out how something can come from nothing. Their answer is that something came from something else. But where did that something else come from? So Breisheet, Perek Aleph, Pasuk Aleph, Breisheet 1:1 tells us that something came from God. The other explanations are going to fall flat. It's ex nihilo. The second creation that is created ex nihilo is life. That's on the 5th day. Vayivra Elokim, Pasuk 21. Vayivra Elokim. God created life. The Taninim Hagedolim, all the things that move. It might be primitive life, doesn't make a difference. It's very possible that one life form can evolve and change into another life form. But where did the first life form come from? I suspect that the Torah is saying that the creation of life doesn't happen by accident. Creation of life by Vayivra Elokim. Life doesn't emerge spontaneously. They used to believe that, right? Before that famous experiment with the cheesecloth on top of the jar with the meat, they thought that maggots, spontaneous generation. Science basically said, no, I don't believe in spontaneous generation. Okay. I suspect, and I don't know this for sure, but I suspect that Torah is saying over here the word bara, following the Ramban, who says that bara is ex nihilo, something from nothing. That what we have here is the emergence of life. God breathed life into living beings. Okay. And that's the second bara. Next week, we're going to take a look at the third bara, and you're going to see it. And you're going to see it in very, very powerful ways. I invite you all to prepare for next week, the 6th day of creation. It's a long section. It goes from Pasuk 23 through the end of chapter 1, through Pasuk 31. Okay, I'm going to put it up on the Google Doc so you can have access to it. I also created these little tabs on the side that you can jump very quickly to the latest part of the document. And feel free, like I said in the beginning, feel free to jump in, to read what other people have said, to comment on them, or to share your own comments as well. And I look forward to seeing you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Rabbi.
B'simcha, with pleasure.
Fascinating material. Thank you. Beautifully done.
Erin, I see you have your hand raised. You need to turn on your microphone so I can hear you.
Sorry, what does Shorish bara mean?
That's an excellent question. I usually work with the Ramban's reading that bara is used exclusively for creating something from nothing.
Okay. Toda Rabba, we'll see you next week. This
Great.
was fascinating.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.